Our sermon this morning was inspired by one of our most beloved members, the marvelous Ann Dorsbeck. And Ann is with us on Zoom this morning. There she is. Hey, Ann. Y'all give a wave out to Ann. Ann, you want to wave at us? We love you, Ann. There she is. Thank you, Ann. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the peoples. Those words come to us from the Hebrew Scriptures, specifically from the book of Isaiah. My rabbi friends tell me that in Jewish tradition, following the exodus from Egypt and the settlement in the Promised Land, the Hebrew God, who has no name but simply I am, gave to the chosen people some very specific instructions on how to live with one another and how to properly serve their Creator. Over time, people did what people do, and they drifted away from their devotion and lapsed into selfish and harmful ways of being. And from time to time, the God of no name found it necessary to send forth prophets, humans who were directed to call the people back into right relationship with each other and with their God. Isaiah was one of those great prophets. This particular phrase, "For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the peoples," appears in the 56th chapter of Isaiah. Biblical scholars have interpreted it to be the prophet's bold declaration that, counter to many of the people's assumptions about their special and privileged place of favor in the eyes of the divine, the prophet declared that the love of God's embrace extends to all, regardless of their status or identity. Isaiah's proclamation was a direct challenge to the religious leaders of his time, who failed to uphold justice and respect for those who were seen as others. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the peoples. These same words are echoed later in the writings of the Christian Gospels and were often quoted by some early American Universalists as they articulated their vision that God's love was unconditional and that all people were God's children. About 6 months before the members of this congregation officially voted to call me to serve as your minister, there was another important vote which took place here at what we now call All Peoples. Now, I had not yet arrived here in Louisville, and so I did not take part in what I'm about to talk about. Many of you were here at the time and probably know much more about it than I do. But this morning I want to share with you some of what I have been told, some of what I have read in the records and the writings published by the congregation at that time, and what I think about what is a major milestone in the life and the identity of this church, and maybe a little of what I believe it means for us today. Picture it. It is December of the year 2020. Not much is happening in the world, unless you consider a global pandemic, which is devastating the lives of so many and leaving all of us isolated and separated. And the continuing demonstrations and righteous outrage that is taking place in the streets of our city over the murder of Breonna Taylor. Not to mention the horrific separations of families and the caging of children happening along our southern border. Actions being carried out by the first administration of a man who will soon be our president once again. Amid all of this, back at the end of 2020, our congregation came together and voted to officially change its name. Now, this was not a sudden decision. It was the result of years of careful and thoughtful discussion and discernment, the culmination of some deep introspection and communal questioning about who we were, who our values demanded that we be, and what kind of church community we wanted to become. And thus, this beloved institution, which had been named Thomas Jefferson Unitarian Church for almost 6 decades, officially became known to the world as All Peoples, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. On numerous occasions, I get asked by somebody about our name, specifically the choice to use the term peoples instead of just people. It is kind of an odd linguistic pluralization, after all. Around that time of this historic vote, longtime church member Rob Kingsolver wrote a short essay about some of his thoughts on this change. Among Rob's many wise observations was this: the name All Peoples denotes every racial, ethnic, religious, gender, age, and other category of humankind imaginable. When Thomas Jefferson referred to people in "We the People" in that first line of his famous declaration, he meant only one kind of person: white, male, Christian, property owners of Western European ancestry. By adopting the name All Peoples, we can transcend Jefferson's worldview and signify our commitment to universal fellowship and genuine inclusion. Changing our name better communicates that intention. But perhaps even more important are the lessons that we are learning along the way about letting go of the old, fostering empathy, trusting each other, and embracing a better vision for ourselves. Now, I first connected with this congregation. It was about a month or so after this name change was adopted. And in my initial meetings with the members of the ministerial search committee at the time, who I think Rob was one of them, wasn't he? I can tell you that I could feel the excitement and the genuine enthusiasm that they felt about becoming All Peoples. I had done my research before these interviews began, and I had followed what was happening up here in Louisville from a distance as part of my discernment around whether this place was the right place for me. In retrospect, and with all that I have learned in recent years about the history of this church, the selection of the name All Peoples seems to me to have been a very fitting choice for what this community had already been for quite a while. From its earliest beginnings, this congregation has always been a church for all peoples. A church that has actively supported and advocated, been on the side of, been for those in the wider community who have been marginalized. This church's very first minister traveled to Selma to march with Dr. King. In the early 1990s, we joined with other religious groups in a lawsuit against the state of Kentucky, objecting to statutes that criminalized gay identity. For many years, numerous members have supported a group of young children living in Kenya who were orphaned by the AIDS epidemic. We have sponsored refugee families from Sudan, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Congo, and many other places, and offered them support and care as they made new lives here in Louisville. Now, several years ago, I was visiting with Ann Dorsbeck, and she sat me down in her kitchen, and she told me all about how she and other members of this congregation had tirelessly worked to remodel the farmhouse over there, mainly so it could be used to host weddings, particularly weddings for same-sex couples, at a time when very few other churches in our area were open to having such ceremonies. Anne also shared with me other memorable moments when this church had warmly welcomed our Muslim neighbors and our Jewish friends and many others, and created meaningful connections across interfaith divides. Now, if you don't know Anne, she will be the very first to tell you that those exact words from the book of Isaiah, the words that are back here on the wall right behind me, those words were written across the front of the synagogue that she and her family attended in a small town in Germany when she was just a child, in the days before the Nazis rose to power and wiped out the entire Jewish community there. Anne, for one, I think really likes our new name quite a bit. And I have to tell you that I do too. I've probably told you this before, but I love to tell this story. About once a month, I get together on Zoom with a large group of other Unitarian Universalist ministers from all across our region. And as we go around, we'll do our little check-in. And inevitably, I end up introducing myself right after another one of my colleagues who serves a church up in Michigan. And she will say her name and her pronouns, and then she'll say that she's the minister of People's Unitarian Universalist Church. And then I get to go next and say, hi, I'm Bruce, the minister of all People's Unitarian Universalist Church. And we laugh about it. I love the name All Peoples because I think it is a bold declaration to everyone in Louisville and the world beyond that we are a community that takes our Unitarian Universalist values of equity, justice, pluralism, interdependence, and transformation seriously. That we are committed to doing whatever it takes to protect those who are being victimized or abused, and to demand that we all receive the respect and the care that we deserve. I also love the name All Peoples because I think it represents a challenge to really live into becoming who we are out there saying that we are. To me, the challenge it offers us is the inspiration to become not only a house for all peoples, a place that supports and advocates for others, but to becoming a community of all peoples, a congregation which truly celebrates the presence and the participation of all kinds of different folks. The challenge is to become a religious home that doesn't just include diverse people, but joyfully affirms that diversity is an essential part of who we are. For much of the last century, in this congregation and so many other UU churches out there, there has been this prevailing identity, the prevailing identity that we are a community of like-minded people. Sounds great. But so often, implicitly and sometimes explicitly, it has been interpreted to mean that we are a group for white-identified, college-educated, upper-income, cisgender, heterosexual, and intellectual people. Kind of only. Despite all of our talk about diversity, all of our work to support social justice, that core identity has remained ingrained in our thinking about who we are as a religious community. Now, we would always certainly welcome someone who didn't fit that particular mold. but we would be including them in this place that is not really theirs. I think that adopting the name All Peoples 4 years ago was an act of acknowledging how deeply flawed and incredibly limiting those old ways of thinking are. It is an intentional decision to say that we can and we will be more than that. In just the few short years that I have been your minister, I have witnessed this transformation happening here all the time. People letting go of the past. People trying new things. People opening their arms and welcoming new folks. People questioning their assumptions. People examining their prejudices. People imagining something more. We have not completed this journey of evolving our communal identity by any means. And it is probably not a journey that we will ever complete. There will always be new ways to understand ourselves and our shared values. There will always be thoughtful learning and growing to be done. But our commitment to that transformation is stronger than ever. And we are seeing it happening. We are seeing new people find a home here all the time. Now, I don't have to tell you that there is a storm coming. If you have watched any of the news this past week, you know that we can expect for some pretty sweeping and harmful changes to happen as the forces aligned with Christian nationalism complete their takeover of our federal government. In the coming years and months, as a congregation, we are going to be called to live into our name like never before, to proudly and defiantly be and become a church for all peoples and a church of all peoples. Many among us may suffer. Many in our community may need our voice and our unwavering support. All of us will need to know that this beloved community is here to embrace us, to defend us, to care for us. And that amid our divided and despairing society, all can have a home here. In the Jewish tradition, the prophet Isaiah was a voice for liberation, a forceful advocate calling the people to live by their values and not succumb to societal divisions. The words attributed to this great prophet speak of a greater, holy promise that unjust leaders would be defeated and that righteousness and goodness would someday be restored. Today, our Unitarian Universalist values insist that we as a congregation become that prophetic witness right now. That force of love and hope for ourselves, for each other, and for those who are counting on us. And we are doing this. We are doing it, not only in our outward justice work in the larger community, not only in our caring support and solidarity with others who are being hurt. We are witnessing in all of the ways that we come together and celebrate together. We are witnessing that this church is and remains committed to ever becoming a home for everyone and anyone who needs a brave space that honors the sacredness of our connections. We are witnessing by telling the world each and every day that our house is called a house for all the peoples.